Imagine a king so powerful, so feared, so completely unstoppable that he marched his army out of the heart of Africa, smashed through every city in his path, and forced the mightiest rulers of Egypt to drop to their knees before him. His name was Piye. He conquered one of the greatest civilizations in human history, and almost nobody talks about him. If you have never heard this name before, that is exactly why you need to stay right here. Because what Piye did over 2,700 years ago did not just shake Egypt, it shook the entire ancient world. And by the time this story is over, you will be asking yourself the same question everyone asks. Why did nobody ever tell me this? To understand Piye, you first have to understand the world he was born into. And the best place to start is Egypt itself, because by the time Piye came to power, Egypt was a mess. This is roughly 750 BC, the Egypt of the great pharaohs, the Egypt of Ramesses the Great, of Thutmose, of the massive temples and the golden thrones. That Egypt was fading fast. The once unified empire had cracked apart. There was no single pharaoh ruling from one palace with total control. Instead, Egypt had fractured into a collection of smaller kingdoms, city-states, and territories, each ruled by its own local king or warlord. These men called themselves pharaohs, but in truth, they were closer to regional lords, powerful in their own patch of land, constantly suspicious of each other, and incapable of standing together. Egypt, the civilization that had lasted for thousands of years, was eating itself from the inside. And while all of that was happening in the north, something very different was building in the south. South of Egypt, deep in the region the ancient Egyptians called Kush, the land that today we know as Sudan, a powerful African kingdom had been growing for centuries. The kingdom of Kush is one of the most overlooked civilizations in all of history. Most people have never heard of it, but it was real. It was extraordinary, and it was anything but primitive. The Kushites built cities and temples. They ran trade routes that stretched across the ancient world. They had their own written language. And here is the detail that surprises almost everyone. Sudan today has more ancient pyramids than Egypt. Not a few more, significantly more. The Kushites built over 200 pyramids, and many of them still stand in the desert today. But what made the Kushites truly fascinating was their deep, complex relationship with Egypt. For centuries, the two civilizations had been intertwined, sometimes at war, sometimes as partners, sometimes one ruling over the other. Over time, the Kushites had absorbed much of Egyptian culture. They worshipped Egyptian gods, particularly the great god Amun. They used Egyptian-style writing. They built their temples in the Egyptian tradition. In many ways, the Kushites had become the most devoted followers of ancient Egyptian culture, possibly even more devoted than the Egyptians themselves. By the time a king named Piye sat on the throne of Kush at the city of Napata, near the sacred mountain of Jebel Barkal, his kingdom was strong, organized, and deeply religious. Piye was not a man who took power lightly. He believed that Amun, the supreme god of the Egyptian world, had chosen him personally to guide and protect his people. That belief shaped everything he did, every decision, every battle, every mercy he granted, and every punishment he delivered. Piye was not looking for a war with Egypt, but Egypt was about to give him one anyway. The man who lit the fire was a warlord from the north of Egypt named Tefnacht. Tefnacht was the ruler of a city called Sais, located in the Nile Delta region near the Mediterranean coast. He was ambitious, aggressive, and had a very clear goal in mind. He wanted to reunify Egypt, under his own rule, of course. Tefnacht began doing something that the fragmented Egyptian kings had failed to do for generations. He started building alliances. He went from city to city, convincing local rulers to join his coalition. And as his coalition grew, he pushed his army southward through Egypt, absorbing more territory with every step, city by city, kingdom by kingdom. Tefnacht was on the move, and he was not stopping. His campaign was working. The southern Egyptian cities were falling under his influence one after another. But as Tefnacht pushed further south, he began moving into territory that Piye considered his own sphere of influence, cities that had pledged loyalty to Kush. And when Tefnacht's forces surrounded and pressured the important city of Hermopolis, which was ruled by a man named Nimlot, one of Piye's own vassals, the line had been crossed. Word reached Piye at Napata. Tefnakht was advancing. His own allies were being squeezed. The southern Egyptian cities were sending desperate messages north. The situation demanded a response. Piye's response came in two parts. First, he sent a vanguard force, an advance army, north to engage Tefnakht's coalition. But before they left, Piye gave them an instruction that was unusual even by ancient standards. He told his soldiers to purify themselves before engaging the enemy, to bathe, to pray, to present themselves ritually clean before the battle. Because in Piye's worldview, this campaign was not simply military, it was sacred. He was fighting not just to protect territory, he was fighting on behalf of Amun. The vanguard army moved north and met Tefnakht's forces near the city of Heracleopolis and along the Nile River. The battle was fierce, fought on both water and land, and Piye's forces won. They drove Tefnakht's coalition back and broke through the siege around Heracleopolis. But when the reports of the victory came back to Piye, he was not satisfied. Not because the battle was lost, it was won, but because his commanders had failed to follow his ritual instructions properly. In his view, the army had fought without the full blessing of Amun. A military victory achieved without spiritual discipline was, to Piye, incomplete. He made his decision. He would go north himself. Before engaging the enemy further, Piye traveled to the sacred city of Thebes, the religious capital of Upper Egypt and the great center of Amun worship. He arrived during the Apet festival, one of the most important religious celebrations in the Egyptian calendar. And rather than rushing past to join his army in battle, Piye stopped. He participated fully in the festival. He made offerings. He honored the god. This was not a delay. It was a statement. Piye was sending a message to every Egyptian watching. I am not a foreign invader. I am a servant of your own God. I belong here more than the warlords tearing your country apart. After Thebes, Piye marched his full force to Hermopolis, where Nimlot, the man who had been his vassal and had switched sides to join Tefnakht, was now sheltering behind the city walls. The siege of Hermopolis began. Nimlot's city was well defended, and he believed he could hold out. But Piye was a patient man. He ordered siege ramps built. He had towers constructed. His archers maintained constant pressure. The army sealed every exit. Weeks passed, then more weeks. The city began to run out of food. The people inside were suffering, and eventually the horses inside the city began to starve. When Piye received word that the horses in Hermopolis were dying of hunger, he was furious. Not over the casualties of war, not over the cost of the siege, over the horses. Piye had a deep, almost spiritual connection to horses. He considered them noble creatures, deserving of proper care and respect. A city that allowed its horses to waste away was, in his eyes, a city without honor. This single detail, a king who cried over starving horses in the middle of a military campaign, tells you more about Piye than any battle record ever could. Eventually, Nimlot's wife emerged from the city. She went to Piye's queens and princesses and pleaded for mercy. Nimlot himself came out shortly after, prostrating himself in the dirt before Piye, offering his finest horses as tribute and begging forgiveness. Piye accepted the surrender, but he refused to look at Nimlot directly. His former ally had betrayed him. Nimlot was alive, but the humiliation was deliberate and total. Piye did not need to raise a sword to deliver punishment. A turned face was enough. With Hermopolis taken, the psychological impact was immediate. Word spread fast across Egypt. A king from Kush had come north. He was disciplined. He was devout. He was winning. One by one, cities began to calculate whether resistance was worth it, but there was still one target that mattered above all others: Memphis. Memphis was the ancient capital of Egypt, one of the most historically significant and most heavily fortified cities in the ancient world. Tefnakht had reinforced it personally, packing it with supplies and soldiers. Its walls were massive, and on one side, the city's defenses ran directly down to the water's edge of the Nile, which seemed to make a direct assault almost impossible. Piye stood before the city and looked at the harbor. He saw the boats and ships moored along the waterfront, vessels packed tightly along the walls, and he did something nobody in Memphis expected. He seized those boats and used them as floating platforms, launching an assault directly against the waterside walls. His forces swarmed from the water. Memphis fell in days. The fall of Memphis was the moment the entire campaign turned. This was not a regional skirmish anymore. Piye had taken the ancient heart of Egypt. The kings who had been wavering now understood that there was no point in fighting. The dominoes began to fall. Local rulers came forward with tribute. Princes who had called themselves pharaohs now arrived before Piye with gold, with livestock, with horses, with offerings of every kind. 4 men who had worn crowns in their own territories now lay flat on their stomachs in the dust before a king from Nubia. The ancient Egyptian records of this moment are extraordinary. They read almost like a scene from a dramatic story, but they are completely factual, carved into stone. One of the surrendering rulers, Osorkon IV, brought horses and precious goods and pledged his loyalty. Piye allowed him to remain in place as a subject ruler. Piye was not interested in destruction for its own sake. He was interested in order, in restoration, in what he saw as Egypt returning to its proper, God-honoring condition. Only one man remained defiant: Tefnacht. The man who had started all of this was now isolated in his northern stronghold, abandoned by every ally he had built his coalition with. There was nowhere left to go. Tefnacht sent a messenger to Piye. He swore an oath before the gods that he would never again act against Kush. He sent gold, jewels, and tribute. He asked for mercy. Piye accepted. But he did something remarkable. He never traveled north to meet Tefnacht in person. He never stood before him. He never received the surrender face to face. He handled the entire thing through messengers. Tefnacht, the man who had nearly seized control of all of Egypt, the man who had provoked this entire war, was not even granted the dignity of a personal audience with the king he had challenged. Piye had now accomplished something that no ruler had done in generations. He controlled all of Egypt. The entire length of the Nile, from the Mediterranean coast in the north to the deep reaches of Nubian Africa in the south, was under his authority. The whole thing, every city, every fortress, every king. And then Piye did something almost no conqueror in history had ever done. He went home. He packed the tribute, loaded his ships with the gold and horses and offerings gathered from the defeated kings, and sailed back south to Napata. He returned to his own kingdom, to his own people, to the sacred mountain of Jebel Barkal and the temples he loved. He did not stay in Egypt. He did not set up a new court in Memphis or Thebes. He went home. Why? Historians have debated this for over a century. Some believe Piye simply saw his mission as complete. He had restored order, punished the warlords, honored Amun, and returned Egypt to stability. There was nothing left for him to prove. Others suggest that Kush was always his true home, and ruling Egypt from a distance was enough. Whatever the reason, the choice speaks to the kind of man Piye was. He had not fought this war for personal glory. He had fought it because he believed it was right. What makes Piye's story almost unique in ancient history is what he left behind. Not just a conquered territory, a written record. After his campaign, Piye commissioned a massive stone monument, a stele, inscribed with the full account of his conquest. This monument, now known as the Victory Stele, was discovered in 1862 in Sudan and today sits in the Egyptian Museum in Cairo. It is one of the longest and most detailed inscriptions from the ancient world. It describes every battle, every city, every surrendering king. It records Piye's anger over the horses, his contempt for rulers who ate fish, which he considered ritually impure, his refusal to meet Tefnacht, his stops for prayer in the middle of a military campaign. Piye wanted posterity to know not just what he did, but who he was. His conquest established what historians call the 25th dynasty of Egypt, a period when Kushite kings from Sudan ruled Egypt. This dynasty lasted for decades and produced some of the most capable and culturally rich rulers in Egypt's entire history. Piye's successors, including his brother Shabaka and eventually the great Taharqa, continued to govern Egypt with the same devotion to Amun and the same respect for Egyptian tradition that Piye himself had modeled. Which brings us to the question that this story almost forces you to ask. If Piye was this significant, if his conquest was this complete, this documented, this extraordinary, why is his name not taught in schools? Why does almost nobody know who he was? The honest answer is uncomfortable. For a long time, the African origins of major ancient civilizations were minimized, ignored, or explained away by early Western historians. The Nubian pharaohs were not hidden. The Victory Stele was sitting in a museum. The pyramids of Sudan were still standing in the desert. The evidence was never missing. It was simply not amplified, not repeated, not taught. History has always been shaped by who tells it. And for too long, the people telling ancient history had reasons, conscious or not, to leave certain chapters out. Piye was a real king. His war was real. His victory was real. And the stone he left behind, carved with his own words in his own time, makes it impossible to deny. He was a man who conquered an empire not out of greed, but out of belief, who wept over horses while kings begged at his feet, who walked away from Egypt after taking it, because taking it was never really the point. That is the story of Piye. And now you know it. If this story stayed with you the way we think it will, share it. Because the world needs to hear more of these. And if you are ready to go even deeper into the forgotten chapters of ancient history, the next video is right there waiting for you. We will see you in the next one.